Former Vice President Joe Biden went into the first debate ahead of President Trump in the polls, and that is, in fact, where he remains. NBC reported that Biden continues to hold the upper hand in national polling and in many key battleground states.
But President Trump has got an advantage whenever it comes to voter registration. Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Republicans actually netted over 400,000 new voter registrations. And if the race continues to tighten, this may actually give Trump a chance.
We are back with Team Ryzen to break down the post-debate polls. Author, president, and founder of Solidarity Strategies and former senior advisor for the Sanders campaign, Chuck Rocha, joins us now, and also co-host of the Realignment podcast, Marshall Kosloff, is with us as well. Great to see you, gentlemen.
Good to see you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Marshall, let me start with you. It looks like we see maybe a little bit of Joe Biden bump coming out of the debates. Of course, that was mere days ago, and the race has been completely upended once again with the president's positive coronavirus test. But just what's your analysis of kind of the movement in the polls that we've seen this week after President Trump, what most people judge to be a failed debate performance?
Yeah, I mean, you put it exactly the way that you put it, which is that in 3 days, another thing could happen, and whatever that tiny bump was could sort of change. I think that what we're sort of seeing with those polls and the polls that were going into the debate and the polls after the debate is just that there is this 8-point lead that Joe Biden has, and that's a pretty stable lead. And anything that doesn't change that lead is basically going to be a loss for Trump. So even if Biden didn't perform amazingly during the debate, if nothing fundamentally changes in the race, that's a win for Joe Biden. And that's the dynamic that the Trump campaign just doesn't seem to be able to sort of get itself out of.
Yeah, you know, Chuck, we've basically seen it's not impossible, but they have not found the strategy whatsoever to close that gap. I mean, talk to us, Chuck, because I know you've been involved in this for a long time, about that voters registration. A lot of Republicans pointed to it. How correlated is voter registration and drives and all of that whenever it comes to actually turning out mass votes and winning an election come election day?
Well, there's a lot of philosophy about this and a lot of things that people get wrong. And that is that this registration means you're going to have more people to vote. You can get some more people to vote. But the problem is once you register to vote, you still don't have a voting history. And at least Democrats always get that wrong. And Crystal knows this, is that we don't go talk to these newly registered voters because they're not a prime voter. So the reason why we don't, and we have a drop off there, is because there's not that conversation going on. Let me tell you some interesting numbers that I found out this morning from Orange County. Not even know we were going to talk about this because this is actually what I'm working on right now in Orlando, where all these Puerto Ricans have moved. I'm going to turn and look at these numbers. The Democratic registration for Latinos in that county since Donald Trump has been president, 23,200 of them registered as Democrats. 7,200 of them registered as Republicans. But here's the big one. 28,235 of them registered as no party preference. That is Puerto Ricans moving to Orlando who have registered to vote since Donald Trump has been president. Now, what that tells me is they want to participate. The island politics has a lot of corruption. Democrats aren't Democrats, Republicans aren't Republicans. And it's up to us as progressives, as Democrats, to go talk to them to say, this is why you're a progressive. This is why you're a Democrat. And I worry that nobody's doing that. I'm doing that through Nuestro PAC. I'm sending them mail, digital commercials. But this is the key to exactly who can win this race.
That's interesting.
And Marshall, I feel like we've all been so scarred in a way by 2016. In any other presidential year, if you had a race that was this basically consistent of a solid lead for one candidate and a solid lead also in the key battleground states, although it's a little bit narrower, for one candidate, you'd be like, oh, I mean, this is what's going to happen. It's been basically 7 points for Joe Biden, give or take, the entire time. Do you think that we're over factoring in the lessons of 2016 and how much we all got burned, or almost everybody got burned from that election?
100%, right? I'm pretty sure, all of us are. Everyone from Twitter to sort of this show to the rest of sort of the news, everyone is afraid of just looking really dumb. And it's sort of meaning that I think everyone just has a vision of that New York Times ticker during, 2016. I'm sure everyone remembers what it felt like to see that sort of collapse downwards. So I think, everyone's holding their hands behind their back. At the end of the day, it seems pretty clear that Joe Biden is going to win this pretty handily. But, maybe I'll look really stupid, in November.
Yeah, I mean, Chuck, that's the other thing I've come to see, too, which is that it seems to me it's just as likely a narrow Trump win as a Joe Biden landslide victory come November. What do you think?
So think about this. Let's get here wonky with all of your great listeners who love when we do this. It's likely voters. What is a likely voter? It's a guesstimation off of a pollster saying, I think I know who's likely going to vote. And let me tie it back to this debacle, which was a debate. There needs to be a lot of increased turnout to drive up numbers. There was nothing you saw in the debate that would really make a bunch of new people want to get involved into politics. That's one. B, when you talk about likely voters, I just talked about all the newly registered voters in Orange County. Who's talking to them? So I think when you're looking at these polls, don't get distracted by this national number. But when you see us within 2 or 5% in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, that's why and how Donald Trump pulled this off last time is there can be a dramatic movement in a little state like South Carolina with just a few likely voters showing up or being polled. And like an NBC poll that was done in Florida that only had 135 Latinos in it, and it wasn't bilingual. There's little nuances in these polls that you should keep your eye on, right, wrong, or indifferent.
Chuck, I have one more question for you, which is that I saw some polling showing that the largest group of undecided voters, and there aren't that many left, by the way, most people have made up their mind, but actually the largest group was Latino voters. There was something like 23% of Latinos who were still undecided. What does that tell you? And if you had to bet, which way do you think that they ultimately break?
There was an Aleo poll that came out 2 weeks ago from the National Association of Latino Elected Officials that answers your question, Crystal. 61% of Latinos said that they had not heard from either campaign in the battleground states.
Wow.
Because both campaigns are still doing the same thing. They're running Spanish language advertising on Telemundo and Univision, which is cool. And you're getting to that 30% of people who listen to them every day and are Spanish dominant. But the other 60%, remember when we used to talk about Bernie's strategy and the multi-layered approach? TV, radio, digital, Pandora, all the different ways that I talk to these Latinos, that's what's not happening from at least both of the presidential campaigns, hence why Nuestro PAC now has started filling in those gaps, at least for Joe Biden, doing the Pandora ads, doing the mail pieces, I bought Spanish language newspaper ads this week in Michigan. Like, this is the nuances that people don't keep up with our vote. So it's not shocking.
They really don't. All right, Chuck, Marshall, thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks, guys. Great to see you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Still to come, despite a lack of support from Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi did pass a stimulus package in the House yesterday. We're going to break down what that all means and where things might be heading when Rising returns.